Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And reviewing the papers, The Guardian's new joint political editor, Anushka Asthana, one of the most trenchant voices in journalism, Peter Hitchens from the Mail on Sunday, and with her eye on the global economy, Yueh. But there's The Observer, not the Chancellor's most enthusiastic supporting newspaper. Osborne tax plans will hand billions to the UK's wealthiest. It says the sensational Mail on Sunday front page, Gove is nuts, Boris is after my job. That's clearly an interview with the Prime Minister. No, it's not. No, it's a book by a Liberal Democrat, but still great reading inside. Sunday Times has got a story about the palace fighting to save the Queen from being dragged into the Brexit debate on either side. And their rather sensational story, I think, I'm voting yes to Europe, says Jezza. Clarkson is in favour of a United States of Europe and a European army. Who'd have thought it? And there's The Observer again, sorry about that. And then Sunday Express, if Turkey is in, we're out. That's the voters' verdict. They say yet another poll. But Turkey will be a big issue, I'm quite sure, in the discussions ahead. And finally, Obama is coming here. He's got an Andrew Marr stuck to his head there. Vote stay. Obama flies in to back the EU. Now, where are we starting? I think we have to start with the Mail on Sunday this morning.
We do have to start with the Mail on Sunday. Many of these memoirs are actually quite dull, but these memoirs are terrific. Everybody should read them. The Prime Minister calls Michael Gove, the man he introduced to politics and persuaded to become an MP and a minister. He says he's a Maoist. Michael Gove's aide responds by saying David Cameron is a muppet. George Osborne is caught negotiating over which city should be in the northern powerhouse and which shouldn't be. A cabinet minister is found suggesting that instead of having immigrants to pick all the fruit, we get pensioners to do it for starvation wages. The whole thing is exposed. Yes, Minister actually looks like Tolstoy compared with this. This is the Bash Street Kids versus Lord Snooty in a kind of scramble and tangle of ludicrous people falling over each other with no principle, no idea of what they're doing, and actually all loathing each other at the same time.
The question,
it's all
Peter,
true,
I suppose, I was going to say is, can we believe a word of it? This is Edward Davey, who was a Lib Dem minister. He's been talking to Nick Clegg. Both of them are quite bruised about, David Laws, I beg your pardon, quite bruised about the government and so forth. So perhaps they would be saying this, wouldn't they?
Well, yes, they would be, but on the other hand, it seems to me, and I imagine it seems to you from your long experience with these people, to have the ring of truth to it.
Certainly. Well, I will say no more.
I would say that this is basically the Lib Dems' revenge, and only the beginning of it. We've got a book from Nick Clegg later in the year, and I'm kind of not surprised, because during the election, it was a Tory sport to butcher Lib Dems, metaphorically speaking. And I remember the Prime Minister going to David Law's speech, going to David Law's seat and actually trying to overturn his majority successfully. I think David Laws is probably rubbing his hands with glee.
If you get married to someone, stay married to them, or otherwise all your secrets will come out, I think is a good rule in politics as well as other places.
As well as in life. And you've got the Sun there, George Osborne's own article.
Yeah, in many ways it's interesting we don't get more on the budget because of this EU referendum, but George Osborne has written this piece in the Sun on Sunday. He mentions his long-term economic plan. If I was a betting woman, I would say he might be mentioning that again today. But really, this is about trying to do a bit of expectation management, talking about the economy and the difficulties that there have been. But, you know, I think George Osborne will probably want to please voters as well this week and, of course, try and perhaps move towards raising the threshold for 40p.
As they've promised.
But where will he find the money?
Well, there is
in the autumn statement, he found it from the future. He got Doctor Who to help him find several billion quid that nobody previously knew existed. Whether he'll do that again, I don't know.
We'll find out. Linda, we want to talk about the world economy with you a bit, of course, in China and so forth, but your first story is The Observer, as I was mentioning, and tax cuts for the better off.
Yeah, like Anushka mentioned, it looks like whatever spare money there may be, the story here is the Resolution Foundation, which is very focused on low earners, are suggesting that money be used to offset welfare cuts instead of for instance, increasing the personal allowance. In other words, gear it towards the low paid rather than the middle paid and the high paid. And I think that's going to be one of the criteria on which the budget will be judged. Is it fair and will it generate growth? But just backing up on what Anushka mentioned a moment ago, I think there's also an element of credibility here. You can't always blame the global economy, for instance,
well, I was going to ask you about that, because this
growth.
£18 billion black hole, if it exists, if that's what it is, that's based on a slowdown in the British economy.
Yes.
And the Chancellor will say, with some justification, that's because what's happening in China, Middle East, and so forth. The world economy is in trouble too, and we're not immune from that.
Yeah, and I think that's true, but then you have to think how much of that has changed over the past few months since we got the last growth forecasts from the Office for Budget Responsibility, and what the drivers are domestically of growth, how closely linked are that to global exports slowing. So in other words, yes, the global economy isn't doing too well, but the main drivers for why it is the budget is seeing a new black hole is that earnings is lower than expected, it seems, and that means that not as much tax revenue is being generated, and that earnings issue has been going on for years. It's not related to the last few months. So I think these are just things you need to look at the drivers and then say, well, once we understand those, then can we tackle those with the budget? And if we can't, then we have to ask yourself, what are you doing with this budget? Whatever you are doing, is it at least to increase fairness?
It is funny, though.
We'll learn more soon.
It is funny, though, isn't it, that when Labour say that their problems were caused by the global economy, the Tories say, oh, no, it was your fault. But when they have problems with the global economy, it is, of course, the global economy.
Yes, yes. Anushka, you've got this great story column by Jeremy Clarkson. As I say, in the who'd have thought it category.
Who knew? Jeremy Clarkson, a raging Europhile. I originally read this as a write-up in the Mail where they quote him saying that we should have the United States of Europe. And honestly, Andrew, I thought it was a spoof. I was sort of reading down, waiting for the punchline. But no, it turns out that Jeremy Clarkson is arguing here quite strongly that it would be better. Of course, he uses some of his typical language. He says it's a battle between Call Me Dave and Bouncing Boris. Well, he has sided with Call Me Dave. He's actually argued...
Of course, he's a friend of the Prime Minister. He's part of that, not Notting Hill, that Oxfordshire set.
Chipping Norton.
Chipping Norton, that's what I was trying to remember.
And the Mail certainly did mention that at the bottom of the piece, suggesting that perhaps that's why Jeremy Clarkson has come down this way. It's certainly not what I would have expected him to do. If I was going to put my money on Jeremy Clarkson, I would have thought he would be a Brexiteer.
I think it's not so much a surprise. I always thought Jeremy Clarkson was a bit of a pose as being right wing. The smoking and the cars are all very sort of macho and down the pub, but actually there wasn't any deep thought in it. There isn't very much deep thought in that either, I have to say. The idea that you can reform the European Union by camping outside Eurocrats' houses and pestering them with questions doesn't seem to me to have much of a future. The European Union is not a democracy. Nor does it have an opposition.
It sounds like that's a future edition of his new auto show on Amazon. He'll be camping in front of Eurocrat houses.
Tanks in Brussels. You've also chosen Obama is going to intervene in this exciting national discussion.
Well, yes, and I think this is a real problem for a lot of conservatives who tend to think there's a direct choice between being pro-American and being pro-European. The United States has always been very keen on pushing Britain into some kind of European superstate. And for Obama to come across is going to be, I think, a big plus for those who want that to happen. But for all those pro-American Tories who've always thought it's America or Europe, it's not going to be very comfortable to see this happening.
And Trump won't have arrived in time.
Well, no, but who knows what he really actually thinks about this as opposed to what he actually says anyway.
Yes. Now, we've got a story we're not going to be talking about very much later on, so let's do it properly, Linda. Yes. HS2 is at risk of derailing, not as a project, but literally. At top speeds, the report finds. This is one of those projects which is just going to cost more and more and more.
Indeed, £50 billion, I think, is the figure that's already being spent. And this is the train that's trying to connect north and south, going from London through Birmingham to Manchester to Leeds. And the problem, according to a study done by Professor Woodward, the Telegraph is reporting, is that if it were to go as fast as advertised, it would, as you say, literally derail. And I think if it were to slow down, what the story is saying, it wouldn't be much faster than existing trains. And I think it actually raises a bigger question about investment and infrastructure. There's no question this country needs more investment. But I think this is a very good example of how hard it is to find
really good projects.
Yes, exactly, efficient ones.
Isn't the problem with HS2 that it's now become an issue of political ego? The government has turned, has tied themselves to this, and therefore it's going to go ahead, come what may, however much it costs, however dangerous it might be, whatever.
It's an economic crisis be exactly the opportunity to get rid of what is increasingly emerging as a daft project? What people want are lots of medium-speed trains, not one high-speed train taken to Birmingham, where a lot of people don't want to go anyway.
Although in a lot of countries they do have fast trains and they don't derail, so some people might argue, why is it that we can't take on a big project like this? There's also rumblings about Heathrow in the same newspaper, and I think there are going to be these big infrastructure decisions that are going to come to a head.
OK, a story I'm obsessed by, Linda, is graphene. Because this is, in terms of our economic growth, we keep being told there are new products around which are going to kind of drive us forward into the future. Graphene is one of the most exciting ones, but it's being stolen, I'm afraid, by the Chinese.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. That's the story is certainly pointing out this risk that academics at Manchester University are concerned about.
Who discovered it?
Indeed, and I think one of the fascinating things about how innovation happens is that these scientists were literally taking sticky tape and using it on pencil lead and removing layers upon layers until they found graphene. But of course, to commercialize it requires a lot more investment, and that's where a Taiwanese company, actually BGT, has partnered with Manchester University, and they brought in a Chinese manufacturer. Now they're producing something similar to graphene, and I think it really goes to how difficult it is in higher academic research to protect intellectual
property. For people
property.
watching, what will graphene actually be used for?
It's 200 times harder than steel, and yet it's as flexible as rubber. And so you can imagine any number of things. I can imagine sort of the uses of it would be incredible. But that's the gap between commercialization and needing money to bring it to market. But I think this also raises a question about China's lack of intellectual property protection in many, many areas. And when it's subject to international collaboration, that becomes certainly an issue.
A big story. Migrant crisis, Anushka, this is a story.
Yeah, I think this crisis, which frankly isn't on Europe's doorstep, it is in Europe, has actually been really brought to life and humanised by photographs. And we've got one again today in a number of the papers, but here in the Sun on Sunday, which is this mother bathing her 1-month-old baby using the water from a dirty puddle, which will be horrifying to a lot of people. And people will say, you know, what can we do about this? And it's pictures like this that I think really bring it home that it's not just a number that's happening somewhere else. You know, this is in Greece, and it's really, really sad to see things like this taking place.
Well, it's sad. You have to think
of
about it, don't you, as to what's caused it. And what's caused it is this war we started in Syria, and that's what we need to concern ourselves with. Stop starting wars, you won't see so many pictures like that.
We're almost running out of time. We talked about the American elections last week. I'd like to talk about the German elections, Peter. I think you've got to...
Yes, well, these are provincial elections, but they're very important. There's a new party in Germany, the Alternative for Deutschland, which is a sort of German UKIP, which is making huge advances. German politics to me are much more interesting than American politics, and indeed Polish politics. And it's absolutely fascinating. The German people are finally beginning to rise up against the big dominant parties which have ignored what they think about these things.
They don't want to pay for the euro, and they don't want to pay for the migrant crisis.
They certainly don't want this huge number of migrants. They think Angela Merkel was completely crazy when she invited them all in. And I think Germany is now in a very long-term political crisis over this, which we have not by any means seen the end of. The results will be very interesting tonight.
We have, however, seen the end of the paper review. Fascinating and all-encompassing, almost as it was. Thank you all very much indeed.
I've been getting